Hello, it's Carlos. Very good to see you.
Hey there, everyone.
How are you doing this morning?
Fine, actually, doing really fine. The end of the morning for me because 1 hour in front.
You get an extra hour to prepare. We've been talking a little bit, as you'll have seen in previous ones. I'm not very good at. I'm a bit of a procrastinator. I can't make these decisions. So Carlos and I again have been talking about how you go backwards and forwards on these things. And Carlos has an extra hour this morning to finish up his list, which gives that little bit of a bonus.
Yeah, it gives me the extra edge.
Yeah. Hello, Katerina has just joined us, which is lovely to see. Yeah, so we are talking non-Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games this morning. I'm glad to see you've got your beverage of choice ready to go for this. You probably need some caffeine to get through it, even though it's late morning for you. So non-D&D role-playing games. I'll just say a little bit about kind of my thought process. There you go. I'm a native English speaker. You never know. So my thought process, and then if you want to say anything about kind of your thought process as well, then that would be great. So hello, Andy. Even though you're a couple of minutes late, it's still very lovely to see you. So non-D&D role-playing games. We did talk about potentially doing indie role-playing games completely, which I know is kind of a passion for you, Carlos. I think two reasons I kind of steered us away a little bit from that is one, honestly, my exposure and experience of these things is not as great as yours, Carlos. So, but also I think I wanted to give us a little bit of a smoother transition, so that if some people are watching this having only ever played Dungeons and Dragons, for example, it gives them a few kind of stepping off points, maybe to dip their toe in and then move into some of those other things. So that was kind of my thinking. Also, I am going to say at this point, I haven't included Pathfinder. I do enjoy Pathfinder, but Pathfinder is very, very similar to Dungeons and Dragons. So it was at one point described as like D&D 3.75 or something.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. So I'm not hating on Dungeons and Dragons, anything like that. This is just a way of kind of saying there's more things out there. Here are a few ideas. So that's kind of what I'm going for. So do you want to say anything about your kind of thought process, Carlos?
Yeah, in the end, it ended like I ended with 50-50 indies and not indies.
Okay.
Like more 60-40. It almost went to 80-40, like even not going only for indies. Most of them will be indies. But I also try to bring games that are different. They play differently, and some of them are not exactly just the game itself, but what it brings to me as well is in kind of inspiration or the games that I played when using that system.
Yeah, I think there's definitely for me in there. There's a little bit of that like nostalgia as well, like games that I've played and loved in the past. They may not necessarily be, if I looked at them with my analytical head on, they may not be the greatest games out there, but I've just loved playing them. So I think there's always part of that. And I think the other thing, I was looking at this and I was thinking it's actually quite difficult sometimes to distinguish what is an indie game from what is a small non-indie game. That there's not exactly like a
The line is quite blurry,
yeah.
and it depends how you go with that. If you go in strictly, if you go only think like an indie game is, it does not have a label, so it does not have a big producer. It will be one thing. But if you go to the other side, like, okay, indie is like the creators have full creative control of that. That's another way to distinguish because they are independent in the creation of that. So it's something
Yeah.
that
So to avoid some of those complications in when we're trying to fit in talking about 10 games in an hour anyway, that's why we've kind of gone for this. But the plan is, and I'm not springing this on Carlos, he does know, to come on again in a few weeks' time and talk a little bit more about indie games and your love of indie games and all of that kind of stuff. So we will be doing that a bit more in the coming weeks. But I think we should get cracking because we do have a lot of games to talk about. So over I go to my soundboard and we'll go with at number 5. Yeah, and again, Carlos can't hear the sound, so that's part of the reason why I'm going first, is so that I can go straight after the sound effect, but also so that Carlos gets that point of like honour, so he gets to say his number one last is the last thing we focus on. So, my number 5. I'm going to have to get up my list now because I don't want to say something out of order. So, my number 5 is Vampire the Masquerade. So Vampire the Masquerade is a game which is set in the world of darkness, I believe it's called. I had a slight mind blank there. Vampire, and as the yeah, absolutely. Valerian says Carlos has to watch the back later to get the full sound effect. Goodness. Vampire the Masquerade is a vampire game. I mean, that's kind of, you know, you probably guessed that already. But it's set in the modern world, so it's not set in a very it's not like Dracula and Van Helsing and those kind of things. It's set in the modern world, so it is like the kind of modern world is existing, but there is all this vampire stuff going on in the background. Oh, it's Katarina's first TTRPG as Vampire the Masquerade, and I think for me it has a similar thing. So I think it was my second ever TTRPG, which is again probably why it kind of holds a bit of a special place in my heart. It's run, I think, entirely on D10s. I think so. You don't need to worry about having vast sets of dice if you've got D10. Although these days you could just do it all online anyway, can't you? You can just do it like a Google dice roller, or other dice rollers are available, that kind of thing. But I like the Rexish says, nice to put a face to Carlos. There you are. So it has that kind of it's modern, which actually is not a kind of game that I play all that often. I often play the kind of deep fantasy, high fantasy games. You do need vast numbers of D10s, as Bellarian points out. But I think the reason that it's not higher for me is precisely because horror is not normally the genre that I go to. But in Vampire, you are playing as a vampire in the modern world. You're trying to kind of keep this fact hidden, but you also have to do all the vampire-y things, like stay alive by making sure that you have access to blood, and you're doing all those things. There's lots of different clans that you play for, so you could play quite a political game of Vampire the Masquerade, where you have to go out on your clan business and against all those other people. So it's quite a different system from something like a Dungeons and Dragons. It definitely has that different kind of modern Gothic feel, I think, which is something that I don't feel I've encountered all that often in different games. You get modern apocalyptic, but that kind of modern Gothic horror, I think, is not something that I come across. I think probably the other World of Darkness games do the similar thing, but I haven't played them, so I can't comment authoritatively on whether that's the case or not.
They bring just another different place. Like if you go to Werewolf, it's much more combat than Vampire, for instance. Right.
Yeah, I like the fact as well. I think this will be a recurring theme with some of the games which come up. I like the games which are not necessarily so combat focused. So Vampire, there can be a lot of different things that go on, and combat is almost the last resort. Which for me is quite an appealing thing, because there are lots of games out there which do combat and do combat very well, but I don't need 101 different combat games when there's all these other kind of different things I could do. So, one World of Darkness one where it was special powers, which was also cool. Oh, right, there you go. So that is my number 5. What have you got for your number 5, Carlos?
My number 5 is the One Ring RPG. That now it's coming the second edition, but they had a Kickstarter this year, February. But I played only the first edition, and so far it's the game that best passed the Tolkien idea. You play between the end of The Hobbit and the beginning of the Lord of the Rings, so it's that time period, and it's mostly on the part close to the City of the Lake and all of that. So it's most that part on the east. And it was the last campaign that I DM'd and that had a finishing point, like the last campaign that I was able to have a finale and everything like that. So that's why it also holds dear to me. So I have a lot of the books here. And also the books from the first edition were perhaps one of the most beautiful books that I really saw. It was made by Cubicle 7 before. So now it's going to be Fria Liga from Sweden, but that's because I enjoy Tolkien a lot. So I got this thing going for me, and also the emotional part of having GM, having been the last campaign that I GM up until officianado. So
So is that I? I mean, obviously, the One Ring being based in the whole kind of talking world, is that a kind of? Would you say that's kind of combat focused, or is that?
it has combat in a different way from D&D. For example, you do not have movement, so you have just stances basically. But the thing that it brings best is the journey. You have a lot of mechanics for journey and for improve, and like you have the shadow points that is kind of the darkness coming to you, like what happened with the ring and Frodo. But in the whole spectrum, like being seduced by the darkness and the shadow points, and you can get some kind of even lose control of your character for the GM to control it for a small amount of time. And if you have a bout of madness, that is how they call it. So,
Okay.
like, and it's different. Like, dwarves have love for gold, or some of them want to be wanderers, and some of them. So it's
Okay. Yeah, because I did almost make a joke actually about how if it was really well based on a Tolkien thing, you'd have to spend 3 sessions just walking to the next place where you were going to.
you'd spend a lot of rounds just walking. That's it.
But I think it's the sign of a good game where you do that and it's interesting and it's not just right. Well, I'm walking again. So yeah, I think the other thing there that you mentioned was the kind of the madness stuff. I think it's a really interesting mechanic that but it needs to be done well. Is that idea of because I know there are other things. As I've mentioned many times, I'm not going to go into it now, but I'm not a Cthulhu fan. But they have like sanity points and things like that. So anything where you kind of have that negative effect creeping in as well. That's not just like wounds or something. I think is a really interesting mechanic. Good morning, Pete the Priest. We're still on number 5. So yeah, you haven't. Oh, there you go.
And it's a game, and it's also a game based on D12. So we have a D12 that it's actually it goes from 1 to 10, and the other 2 numbers are actually a rune for Gandalf, that is the critic success, and the other one is the Eye of Sauron. So it's
that's like a crit fail. Right.
yeah, and then you have the D12 and a lot of D6s based on each. If you have 5 points in one skill, you use 5 D6s, but the D12 is always rolled. So.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of the kind of random element of thing. I mean, obviously, all dice rolls are a random element, but that's thrown in extra as that kind of little bit of into everything. Oh, right. Okay. Cool. Love for the D12 in chat. So that's good. That's good. Yeah, I have to say that's not a game I've played either. So that's good to get something different going in. Good stuff. I got some. I'm trying to see what's on those dice. I'm struggling. Are they numbered? Because they're very fancy if they are.
Yeah, they have numbers, but
okay. Yeah, okay, cool.
And the D12 is like that.
I'm gonna. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna say something controversial here. I'm gonna say it and then move on before everyone goes after me. I have said it before. I've never understood the thing about collecting all the dice. Obviously, that's for a game. That's not the same thing. But like collecting hundreds and hundreds of sets of dice, I'm not going to tell anyone that it's not a good thing to do because I collect hundreds and hundreds of little bits of plastic that I may or may not get around to painting. But yeah, collecting dice is never something that's appealed to me. So there you are. That's why I think sometimes the ones with quite a simple dice system appeal to me as well. Although, yeah, as I said, Vampire does require pretty much every D10 ever created. So, it's all good. Right, so let's... Katarina disagrees with me. It's all about the dice. So I'm going to move on to number 4. Number 4! And I'm going to tab over to check the right thing. So I should have said at the beginning, this will give away slightly what's going on here. Peter Priest hates dice but has millions. So there are a couple of things on this list that I have in some way or another worked on. So number 4 is included in this, but there is nothing that I gain financially from. I do work as like a proofreader and an editor on some things, which is how I get kind of deep knowledge of some of these things. But nothing. If you did decide to go off and invest in any of these things afterwards, none of them like give me any money. So it's all stuff that I've kind of done from that. So this is one that I was a proofreader on. But I'm going for Byte RPG. Byte as in BYTE. Not as in, it's not like another vampire thing. They're not just biting everyone left, right, and centre. So Bite RPG is a really interesting one for me because it was kickstarted I think last year. Might have been the year before now. Time since pandemic started has ceased to have any meaning. But yes, one way or another, it was kickstarted recently. It's by a Brazilian guy actually, and it's what I like about Bite is it's very kind of it's very ambitious. Probably the only reason this is down at 4 potentially is because I haven't actually played this, but I've investigated it, and the idea of it really appeals to me. So Bite is kind of a little bit more of a system than it is a particular RPG game, because it's set up so that with this kind of initial book, it gives you the rules to play all kinds of different settings. It's entirely based on D8s. You only need D8s. This appears to be a recurring theme. But, I mean, if you play Vampire and this, you need all the D10s and the D8s. So we're not really cutting down on dice. But I think there are like 10 different levels of technology that you can play. There are a number of different settings that kind of come with it. So when it was kickstarted, it came with 2 example settings. One of them was like a modern zombie apocalypse kind of game, which is like a hex crawl, survival, try and find fuel, try and find food kind of stuff. And there was also one which was much more of a kind of traditional, like high fantasy game. So I love the fact with this that you can get the kind of the core rule book, and you can look at it and you can say, this is the game that I want to build, I want to play. Now, obviously, that's true to an extent with all role-playing games that you get. Like, as we said with like Vampire the Masquerade, you could set it in any part of the modern world, you could do all these things, but there is so much scope for individuality and kind of creativity within this that it all kind of works within that one system. For me, that is a really good selling point, because I love to be able to do all that. Basically, any game I play, I love to do a bit of homebrew. I love to kind of come up with different bits and pieces. I think that the level of adaptation and creativity in that is really good. But as I say, unfortunately, it's the only one on my list I haven't actively played, because it does require a lot of things to come together, and there is only a limited amount of time in the day. But yeah, I am really enjoying this. I think so. I guess what I'm saying is this is more about the system than the game itself, because you can turn this system into any kind of game that you want to play at all, which I think is a strength in my opinion. But also, I guess potentially that's again why it doesn't quite hit those really high numbers, because for that, when someone gives me something really specific and exciting, then that maybe that just hits it a little bit higher.
Yeah, you have that freeze by multiple choice. Like you have too much options, and then you do not know which one to choose. Yeah. And it's actually kind of part in the theory of game development, like to limit the scope of your choices, because otherwise players in general, we do not choose.
Yeah, I do think that it's one of those really interesting things that people talk. Oh, thank you for the hydrate, Pete the Priest. I will have some coffee.
I'm having some chimarrão.
I think that's true even within like a campaign of a game, isn't it? Like if you say to your players, you are in this place, you could literally do anything. There is that kind of like, well, I don't have any idea what I'm meant to be doing. You obviously, it's about finding that balance. You don't want to, what they talk about like railroading, isn't it? You don't want to be saying, this is exactly what you have to do. This is the story I am telling, and you happen to be part of it. But it's kind of finding that middle ground, isn't it? But I do think so. So with Bite, it kind of gives you those things, so you can kind of build it in a kind of modular way, which I think is interesting from that point of view. But so that's my number 4 anyway. So what are we looking at for your number 4, Carlos?
Okay, just before, choice paralysis. This is the technical name for when you have too much option and then you cannot choose. Choice paralysis. But my number 4 is the only one that I'm mentioning here that I do not have still a physical copy. I ordered it, but it's still not here. And it's Morkborg. Morkborg is kind of famous right now. It was a huge Kickstarter. It got a huge success because of the aesthetics and design, and it's very much inspired in heavy metal, and it's based on the OSR, a little bit like old school Renaissance, trying to bring some ideas of the older editions from D&D. So it is based in D20, but the word is just sadness and misery. The apocalypse is coming. It's very deadly. I actually developed an adventure for it in one of the jams, and you play as characters that are kind of monsters as well, and it's really building from this aesthetic of heavy metal, despair, and apocalypse, and trying to basically just survive and reach the end of the whole apocalypse, because you have kind of circles of apocalypse, and then each one of them something different happens. So
Yes, Morkborg is a game that I've heard of, but I haven't played. I think it probably doesn't necessarily fulfill the aesthetic that I would look for in that kind of like despair and horror. But I can absolutely, it's one of those things that really kind of, I guess, polarizes, because some people look for a role-playing game which, you know, they get to do all these magical things and save the world, and for other people, actually, to be honest, I love a kind of gritty game. But yeah, that idea, it's I think that it's Swedish or something, is that right?
yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, so it kind of yeah, it definitely is probably an acquired taste, but I absolutely know if that is what you're into, it's had absolutely fantastic reviews. I know
yeah.
it has a lot of love in the community.
And this is one that it depends which way you look. It will be indie or not, because it is made by an independent group, the Stockholm Cartel, like they call it, but it is published or actually distributed more by Fria Liga. That is the one that is making Alien, that is doing the second edition of the One Ring. So depends which way you look at it. It can be discussed if it's not indie. So because Fria Liga is also from Sweden, so.
Yes, and so there you go. So they've got two, albeit only distributed, but they've got two on your list so far. There you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're time is getting away from us, isn't it? I'm enjoying this chat, but I need to keep things moving. I will say, I should have said at the beginning. At the end, what we're planning to do is put the names and some links into the chat of all the games that we've talked about, so that if you are interested in something, you will be able to see exactly what it is there. You'll find a link to it. You can go across to it. I thought that was a bit easier than doing it as we go along. Plus, I don't really want you disappearing off halfway through to investigate a game. You know, I want you to stick around and enjoy more of the chat. So we will put those things in there at the end. So don't worry if you're not sure about, because I mean, actually, Morkborg is kind of spelt like it sounds, but it is a bit, you know, you might be a bit like, what on earth is that? So yeah, you know, we'll put some links in there later on. So yeah, no running off midstream. I have to keep you around. Right, so we'll move on to number 3.
It's number 3.
There we go. So I enjoy my own sound effects far too much. That's the trouble. So at my number 3, I'm going in a completely different direction. I have chosen a definitely indie game. I have gone for a game called Brave Bunnies, which is a game of, well, I mean, kind of as it sounds, really. You play a little rabbit. It's not quite a 1-page RPG. I think it's about a 4-page RPG, something like that. But it's kind of designed to be playable by all ages. You have 4 stats. You pick, essentially you play as a little rabbit, you choose your favourite snack, and then you and some other little rabbits go on an adventure. And this is one that we played, a few of us played, you can see some of the people in chat I played with. And it's essentially, it's kind of completely the opposite end of the spectrum from some of these, because it really could be the kind of game that you could introduce young children into playing RPGs through. I think I don't have kids, so I can't tell you at what point a child would actually understand the concepts, but they're not super challenging. There probably is then a stage of older children where they're like, oh, I'm not a baby, I don't want to play with rabbits anymore. But then you get again to adults, and we were all adults who played this. as we played this. This is another one that I kind of did a tiny bit work, so I was a playtester on it. But again, nothing in there for me. But yeah, it's just so simple, so much fun. There's no kind of combat involved. It is something else. So I think in the adventure that we played, we discovered that someone had stolen all of the most tasty plants from the garden that we were living in. So we went on a big adventure to try and get them back. We encountered the remains of a human picnic, so we had a few little snacks and bits and pieces there. And then we discovered that what actually was happening is someone was stockpiling all the nice, tasty vegetables because they were looking after a baby. So we got there, and it was all so lovely and friendly and fun, and all told, took us a couple of hours. And yeah, it's a great one for, as I say, for groups where you're not after. It's kind of the polar opposite of Morkborg. There is no death metal. There is no despair. I suppose you could play it more like a Watership Down, in which case there could be a bit of despair. But it's that kind of complete opposite. So yeah, that was a whole lot of fun doing that. I guess it's kind of from the same stables. There are some other games around that do the same similar things. I guess maybe something like Honey Heist, that kind of thing. But again, I've never played Honey Heist.
There is also one with capybaras. That is from Momatos. She's from RPGC. I had an interview with her, and so it's very similar in the idea, but it's with capybaras.
Yeah. We had so much fun playing Brave Bunnies. It was a great laugh. So yeah, we enjoyed that very much. So Carlos, number 3.
I continue with the despair route that I am going, but now I am going to a totally different mechanics. That is actually, it's a group of games. It's because it has the SRD, and it started with The Wretched by Chris Bissett. He is based in Manchester, and then he and another creator from the UK, they developed an SRD, and then they made the sealed library and Go Alone. And then they had a jam, and you can find like 50 different games with the same mechanics. And the mechanics is a solo game. You play with 1d6, a deck of cards, and a Jenga tower. And then the thing is, the idea is basically, in most of them, you are alone in some place. The Wretched is based in Alien, so you are inside the ship, and you have a creature outside. And then you are trying to survive, so you draw a card, the card tells you a bit of story, you create your diary, or you record it, or you write it, or whatever, and then you are going and you take some pieces of the block and go building. If the tower blocks fall, you lose. If you draw, I guess, the 4 kings, you lose. And if you draw the 4 aces, before then you win and you survive. You are able to reach the end. And since it's Chris Bissett, he is a musician. He created some soundtracks by him. You can find them in Spotify for Go Alone and for The Wretched, to kind of put you in the mindset of the game. And Go Alone this one is for me one of the best soundtracks for games. And it actually, you are a magical sword and sentient sword that is used by someone, and then it goes, it recounts the story that you are having with that other, and your objective is to, at the end, the adventure that is wielding you, to survive and retire you. Otherwise, you will be just dropped in the floor where you were, to the next one to find you and start the cycle all over again.
And I think I'm right in saying that Chris is a kind of metal musician as well, isn't he? So it'll be metal kind of soundtracks for that as well. So
not exactly, no? Because he did them all by himself. So it's most of them, or actually all of them, do not have singing. So it's like The Wretched is very electronic kind of way. Go Alone remembers a lot of the Zelda kind of soundtrack. So even it's a good soundtrack to keep you concentrated while you're writing or doing something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, solo games like that are quite uncommon in the RPG sphere. Well, I should say, they're in terms of the kind of the big things. I'm sure there are many independent ones out there, but it is an interesting one. That so it's not even like one DM, one player kind of thing. It is literally you sit down with the book and those things that you mentioned, like a Jenga tower and stuff, and you just kind of work your way through it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Like completely solo.
Yeah. Also, just to tie those things together, I know that Chris had a Kickstarter, which I think is just finished, for a module or something for Morkborg.
Yeah.
So, tying all these things together.
Chris actually is the one that made me start creating games.
Okay.
We've talked with him and seeing some of the games that he put together and everything. So basically, he was one of the guys, one of the people that put me into creating games, actually.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, so I think he has quite a few things around, doesn't he? But that again, it's nice to have that variety. So having that like solo game is a really nice one to have amongst everything else that's kind of going on there. So awesome. Right, so let's move on then to number 2.
It's number 2.
And my number 2, I've kind of gone a little bit towards the other one as well. My number 2 is Serenity, the role-playing game. So, as the name might suggest, I suppose it could actually be going in a number of different ways, but it's based in the Firefly universe. So that kind of serenity. It's not about being very serene. So it's it's kind of set. And so for me, I love Firefly. I'm definitely in that camp of, why did they cancel it? This is the worst thing that's ever happened to TV. I find that Firefly fans. No, that's something different. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Firefly fans.
A flame of fireflies probably is not cool.
Yeah. Just picking them out as you go along. But yes, that tend to be very passionate about the fact that this was one of the greatest TV shows and all those kind of things. So the Serenity RPG, which actually is out of print now, but there is a Firefly RPG. Basically, I assume doing a pretty similar thing, but Serenity RPG I think is the one that I played. I think, although it's possible I actually played the Firefly one. Anyway, so these are based on the Cortex RPG system, which I'll come back to and talk a little bit more about in just a minute. But Firefly Serenity. Essentially, if you know the TV series, you'll know the kind of aesthetic that it goes for. So it is that kind of space western kind of thing, but it is that, and I think that this is an idea again that I love in RPGs, is you're not like a superhero, you're not saving the world, you're kind of surviving from one day to the next. And I think it's not quite as bleak as you were talking about, like a Morkborg or something like that, but it is that idea. It's not like this mission allows you to save this city and slay this mighty foe. It's more like, do this and you'll have some fuel and some money and you might be able to eat next week, and that kind of thing. And I love that idea of, for me, it feels much more kind of grounded in reality, even though it's obviously this is a sci-fi thing. You can actually kind of picture yourself in this position rather than being the greatest hero the world has ever known, venturing off to slay some kind of creature. And so, I love Firefly, so I loved the chance to play in it, but I also kind of love that idea of the kind of grittiness, the reality, in a sense, of those things. And the Cortex system, so Serenity was the first game to use the Cortex system. I don't know if it was created specifically for that, because the Cortex is something which is it is a concept in Serenity, in Firefly. So I don't know whether that's where what it was created for. But it's now a system which is used and can be used in all kinds of different games. So again, I know there's a big Kickstarter going on at the moment, Into the Motherlands, which their game is based on the Cortex system. I don't know. I think there's some debate about whether it will be using that system when it's released. I'm not well up on all the individual details, but essentially, the Cortex system, which has, so it was the Cortex system, then they released the Cortex Plus, and now I think it's Cortex Prime. But essentially, it's a really kind of modular system that allows you, again, to build any kind of game that you want, really. You take little modules, you bring them together, you create your own game. It's based on the idea that as you get better at something, the die that you use improves. So you go from, I think the lowest you can have is a D2. So basically, you flip a coin to see if you can achieve something, and then you got to like a D12 if you're super skilled at something. And I just think it's a really nice, clear system. The other thing that I love, and actually this is one of the points in favour of Vampire the Masquerade, which I didn't mention at the time, I love a system where you can take flaws as well as like benefits. So in Serenity, you can have any of you can have war wounds. You can have all kinds of different things, which then give you more points to spend in other areas. But obviously they give you disadvantages. So it feels a lot more to me like you're building an interesting character rather than like in some games where most of what you get is determined by one or two decisions early on. So let's say D&D Pathfinder again as a way to go. You've chosen that you're going to be a fighter. Great. So every few levels you get whatever the book tells you you're going to get. You have a few free choices, but mostly you advance along that very set path. I like any game which gives you much more flexibility and freedom about how you build your character as you advance. So, you're choosing from big lists of traits and attributes and all those kind of things which go together for me to build that really kind of interesting character. And obviously, in those other games that I mentioned, you can still build an interesting character, but a lot of that is on you in terms of building a background and things like that, rather than some of those mechanical things. So I love the fact that you can do that, and I love the fact that the Cortex system, which it's based on, now allows you to build all these different kind of games and kind of work from there. So yeah, Bellurian, who is also a Firefly fan, says, I can't imagine what you mean about the craziness of Firefly fans. Bought 3 sets of the DVDs during my life because I keep giving them to people to make them watch it. I mean, yeah, that sounds about right. And actually, so those of you who've watched this channel quite a bit know that Bedalurian and I go a long way back. We actually went to see a pre-screening of the Serenity movie in London when we both lived in those parts with a Q&A with, I think it was Joss Whedon and I can never remember which way around it is. It's Summer Glau who plays River Tam, I think. So So it's fair to say we were fans and remain so. It's just that it's been a long time since there was anything new. So it was Summer Glau. Yeah, good. Yeah. So yeah, that's my number 2, and I think it's that one. Again, it's kind of like there are different ways of making my list, but I think when you get to the very top, it has to be something which really means a lot to me and has a good system that I enjoy. I think so. That's kind of where we are at this point. Yeah. So let's. Yeah, I feel like I've just basically been talking non-stop for 5 minutes of excitement.
The thing is, when I start reaching the top, I probably will have a lot of other honorable mentions that I did not mention here.
Yeah.
But okay. Now it's something that I am enjoying a lot is leaflet games. So games in a leaflet, because you can buy them in PDF, you can print them quite easily, and then you have the game here. And this one is by a Brazilian creator, Matheus Guax. It's Backpack and Dreams. And the thing is that this system is very simple. Like very simple. Indeed, in creating doesn't have a lot of mechanics, and for me, I'm now playing play by post using this system, and so far it's been the best experience with play by post that I had, because since it's simple, like combat, it encourages combat, but combat is resolved in one roll of the dice, so it's quite quickly, and then because play by post usually the problem is when you have things by rounds. It slows things down because the objective of play by post is everyone join or do something when they have the time. And if you have something by rounds, it doesn't work. Yeah. And since this game is very simple, you can easily do that and create that environment. It has already a hack for it that is jetpacks and something. But it's basically this, but in space. So it uses the same mechanics, but then you have oxygen and other things that you can use in living in the space. So that's it. That's actually the game. And actually, Mateus, I had an interview with him in the news series because he was also one of the people behind the RPG Latam Jam.
Oh yeah.
RPG Latam is our RPG Latin American community. We created that. It's not like an organization; it's more like a hashtag to put everyone together. We created that basically following the RPGC side, that is the Southeast Asian. He was one of the guys behind the jam. I guess I have to stop talking because otherwise we won't finish the top one.
But tell us a little bit more about the game that you're on there. So Backpacks and Dreams. What's kind of what are you doing in it?
It's basically very focused on the journey. So you have it doesn't have like a mechanics for creating characters' backgrounds. It's more how you create stats. You have 3 stats. You have body, mind, and stamina. The stamina you use to when you try to do something. So it's the one that will mostly fluctuate. If you do not have more stamina, it starts impacting your body and your mind as well. So you have just these 3 stats. You uses 2d6s for the mechanical parts for rolling, and it focuses a lot on these things of using resources, adding, so creating connections because you can get boons when you create connections with organizations or people and so on. It gives you some ideas of how to create these connections, but since it's a leaflet, it's a lot open to you to create that. So for us now, the game we started with from a shipwreck, and now we are getting into some kind of ruins territory where you have some native people living there, and then creating this kind of connections. And you have some fixed values, but a lot of the things will be random, and it doesn't have skills per se, saying, okay, I will use skill X to do that. It will be more, I try to do that. And then the GM will say, roll for body or for mind, and which is very different from skill-based games.
Yeah, I always, it's one of my bugbears, I will say, in a skill-based game where the player says, I want to make an, X roll. So let's say I want to make a stealth roll or whatever. Whereas what I want them to say is, I want to sneak along here, and then I, as the DM, can say, okay, well, that's going to be like a stealth check or whatever. So I think that actually removes it even further, so there's not even that possibility for the players. But yes, it is always a little bit of a bugbear where it is like, can I make a something check? And I'm like, well, tell me what you're doing, and I will tell you whether that involves making that kind of check.
I am all for that. They describe, you say, okay, roll for that check, and then they say, oh, but I have, or my background is on that. Mm-hmm. This is another thing, but it's completely different of saying, can I roll for that?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I know, I like that. And I have to say, I've never played play-by-mail RPGs, but part of that is because a lot of the systems that I've played, it does feel like they wouldn't necessarily lend them to, because you're quite right. If each thing that you're having to do lasts 6 seconds, let's say, as a completely arbitrary length of time, not based on any particular system, and you're doing that once a week or whatever it is, that becomes an incredibly slow process. Whereas actually, if you're taking it in a much more narrative approach, the play-by-mail system works really well for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Play-by-post actually, not play-by-mail.
Yeah.
Play-by-mail probably it was in the very long time.
I see. So maybe this is me being old. I still see it as PBM because it we play by electronic mail. I mean.
Okay, yeah. We play by WhatsApp now or Discord. Like we have one room and we just post there.
If that's how the children are playing nowadays, I mean, I was actually just thinking, just the thought of doing that, actually like sending someone a letter and getting it back, but that is genuinely how people did it, you know. I mean, a long time ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very long time ago. Okay, so let's move on and we'll do number one. It's number one. And my number one, this is probably about as far away from an indie game as I have on my list, but my number one is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So this is the first role-playing game I ever played. I played a long campaign of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, starting when I was, I don't know, I've said many times I don't really have a memory, but it would have been when I was maybe 12 or 13 or something like that, the first RPG I ever played. And for those of you who don't know, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is a Games Workshop production, and it's set in the old world of Warhammer. I believe there is a 40k version as well. Somebody mentioned to me, but I've never played that one. So this is the one that's in the old world. And another part of the reason that I want to cling on to this as something good is because Games Workshop just obliterated the old fantasy world anyway, and replaced it completely with Age of Sigmar. So yeah, I think this again ticks off a lot of the different boxes that I have for some of the kind of criteria that I was talking about earlier on. So it is quite a deadly game. So even though it's a Warhammer game, and obviously you'd think that combat is a lot of it, combat can be very, very deadly. So it's something that you do really have to think about. You can get you get attacked by a wild dog, and it can just like tear your leg off, and then you've got one leg for the rest of the campaign. You know, it has all these like ongoing issues. It's not just, you've taken 20 damage, asleep, you'll feel better. You actually have the thing of this damage that you take can impact you in the long term. It is a little bit kind of gritty, and for that very reason, it also has exactly what I said before, which is you don't have to be the greatest hero in the realm. You could actually start as like a beggar or a blacksmith or whatever it is, and how you increase and improve. Bellarian says he remembers getting killed by a snotling, the smallest monster in the game. The snotling was armed with a mushroom in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So you can be a beggar, you can be a blacksmith, and how you improve through the game is based on your professions. So you can start off as a blacksmith, and then you can say, actually, I've decided that I want to do something different, and then you learn and grow through a different path. So it doesn't have that thing of you've made a decision at level 1 that influences basically who you are through the rest of the game. And yeah, I think again it's one of those things which is a very nostalgic choice for me, but I also do enjoy it. It's based mainly around the D100 system, which means there's even more randomness and variability, but that can be quite fun.
And now it's actually published by Cubicle 7 as well. The same that published the One Ring, I guess.
Oh, is it? Okay. Because so they're on to like the 4th edition, I think, of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So I hadn't played this. So I said it was the first game I played. I played it from let's say like 12 till 16 or something. So back in the last millennium. And although actually no, I turned 16 in 2000. So anyway, doesn't matter. I just don't want you to think I'm that old, having talked about posting our moves to each other. And then I hadn't played it in all that time. And then last year, my wife bought me as a gift the most recent, the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I kind of, just reading through it, looking through it, I think it's a really cool and interesting system. And I think, as you say, it is now published by a different company. And I think it's the intellectual property of Games Workshop. But I don't think it has very much to do with them now in terms of the development. I think it's quite a separate entity. So
yeah, it's completely different. It's completely published by Cubicle 7, and actually, I would like for it to have a little bit more of Games Workshop on behind, not on creating the game, but in making marketing for that, because you do not see that much people talking about that, even though Games Workshop is like the behemoth in the...
Yeah, absolutely. Everything else in the nerd sphere, you just see Games Workshop everywhere. But yeah, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is it's something that I hadn't really heard anything about in between playing those games as a youngster and getting the book last year. And as I say, I think the system behind it is great. I think it has a lot of the lore of Warhammer, so it has a very well developed world behind it. But you can play in all kinds of different parts of that world. So I think for me, yeah, it kind of mixes together that nostalgia, but also the technical strengths of a game. So I really like it.
Yeah, so my top one is one that is completely different, and it's Troika. It's also British,
Ah,
but Troika is a psychedelic adventure kind of way. It's based in OSR as well, so it has a little bit of old school with simple stats, simple mechanics, but it's really crazy. It's like you create the background as something like you said for Warhammer. It's what defines you, and also how you develop. But the background sometimes are like you are a hybrid hypo man, or you are old. You are a beggar. You can be a beggar. You can be a I don't know, a pirate. You can be whatever kind of, even like some kind of construct. And it really takes that idea of creating things that are crazy and putting on there the first adventure that comes with the module. It's you going up some in an elevator, in a lift, and each level something happens. One level, old lady comes with candy, and if you eat the candy, something happens crazy. The third, I guess, you have a big blob of flatulent gas, and if you do not push it out, it will explode and everyone will be nauseous and this kind of stuff. So it really gets these simple mechanics. It's easily hackable to create more backgrounds and other things, but it gets this idea of crazy and puts in the 100, and that's why they call it also a little bit of psychedelic, because you have a mix of a lot of stuff. And it's sci-fi in a way, but sci-fi with the Y, so science fantasy, because you have modern things, but with a lot of the ancient things. So you can have kind of a paladin, but you can also have someone that is completely in the other spectrum, like a bounty hunter from Mandalorian or something like that. And the skills system, it uses a system of skills, but the skills are completely different. Like you do not have the same skills each character. It's a background that determines which skill you have. So if you are a cook, you have cooking, you have serving, and then they do not limit you. You can try to use cooking to determine which ingredient or what kind of herbs something is. You can use, it's not like you have one skill for climbing. It has mountaineering, perhaps, and then you can use it for climbing or for doing, like, creating different, even the magic is used by skills. So you can have Fireball 3. It's like you have the skill Fireball with 3 points to it, and then you use it for...
right. Yeah, I think that sounds really. And I think, again, funnily enough, even though they're completely different kind of things, I feel like there's actually quite a lot of similarities between our two top ones, because that's similar in some ways to like the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay idea of there you're getting lots of different skills from lots of different professions and things like that, and kind of bringing them together. I've again, Troika is a game that I've heard of and I've seen bits and pieces about, but I've never played. So it's interesting to hear a bit more about it. Did you say it's a British game?
Yeah, it's made by Daniel Sell. He's British. So I got my well, just after Brexit, they were like putting away all their stock in Amazon. So they put it by the production cost, and then I got mine for like €10 or something.
I had a look at that when it happened, but unfortunately it wasn't the same in the UK.
Yeah,
we get
it's
the
because
worst end of Brexit. Let's not talk about that. I'm not, again. We've had a really good stream, and we don't want to get me started on talking about that. Anyway, but yeah, no, that sounds really interesting, and that's really. I'm interested by the name because I'm pretty sure troika is a Russian word, and I think it's about a chariot, but I might be wrong.
yeah. And it's striker with an exclamation point in the end, so the name is with the exclamation point together.
So it's troika exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Okay. I initially thought you were saying it was TRO exclamation mark in place of the IKA. But then I was...
No.
Yeah, no, okay. I'm overcomplicating things for myself. Okie dokie. Well, thank you for all of those. That was really interesting. So...